Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Liza, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we are joined by Nichole Farrow, one of the UK's leading relationship and family coaches, who works with separated parents to look at how to best support teenagers through divorce. So welcome, Nichole. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Could you perhaps start by giving us a bit of background about yourself, what you do, how you came to be in this field of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working as a coach for nearly 2 decades now, believe it or not. I started off in the corporate world, and a lot of my executives were having more problems at home than they were having at work, where there is a hierarchy. It's not quite as easy when it comes to family dynamics, and a lot of my clients were really suffering. And so I started working a lot more around marriage coaching and divorce, and also blending families, so those second marriages and children in particular. And my personal background is I was born into a blended family. My parents then divorced when I was 2, and of us 6 children, 5 of us, including myself, have gone on to divorce in our adult lives. So I'm very aware of what the repercussions are of divorce on children if you don't get it right. And I'm now very happily married a second time round, and I have to really work at that. And I think, coming from that perspective in terms of my own experience, as well as what I've done around human needs psychology and NLP, and my experience of coaching both in the corporate and personal side, enables me to really support families. Ultimately, everyone I work with has children, and it's about the family at the end of it, whether you're doing this a second time round, first time round, or going through and trying to navigate divorce. Ultimately, you're all a family at the end, just a different shape. So that's who I choose to work with.
And today's focus, because obviously that's a huge range of stuff that you work on with all different types of families, but today's focus is we're looking at teenagers, which slightly gives me a sense of terror. My kids are 8 and 6, so I feel like this is just going to scare me about the next 10 years of my life. But I think there's lots of issues that come about when you're dealing with divorce and there are teenagers involved. That's very different to younger kids, my sort of kids' age, or babies, and each have got their own issues. But teenagers can be complex, can't they? So, should we just start with a brief kind of overview, and then we can dig in maybe on some of the key themes that come out of separation when there's teenagers involved?
Yeah, well, teenagers they look like adults. So quite often they end up being exposed to more than they should, because you forget that they're still children ultimately. And so actually the older the children are of divorce, and this goes for adult children as well, actually the more complex it can be, because they tend to have more of a say or be exposed to more of the stuff that's going on between mum and dad, that really, if they were younger, you would say, we're not going to do that in front of the kids. But when they're teenagers, somehow it seems more acceptable. So somehow they end up being really exposed at a time when teens in particular, whether you're going through a divorce or not, teens are pushing boundaries in terms of independence, in terms of the ideals of the world that they thought the world was like as a child. They're suddenly starting to realise that mum and dad aren't perfect, that we are humans and we have flaws. And they're starting to question and challenge your values and your behaviours by acting out in their own. Add divorce into the mix, and suddenly you've had an even bigger fall from grace than you would if you'd stayed married, because this kind of ideal world that's been set up in the head through childhood has now kind of come crumbling down. And it's at a time when there's heightened emotion, there's hormones, there's exam pressure, there's all of that, and this sort of fight for independence as well. So you've got all of this mix going on, and then on top of that, the two people who should be a bit boring and a bit outdated, but, should be solid and create some stability, are actually showing that they can't do that, and that they're human beings and that they're not getting on with one another. So it's going to throw up a lot, particularly for a teen. And then if they are then exposed to too much, that's really a recipe for disaster. So, quite often you see them being used as messengers. you see bad mouthing or saying things that are derogatory about the other parent in front of the teen. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be what you say. It can be your tone. It can be your body language. 93% of how we communicate is through our body language. So my sister and I did a talk, and we were talking about the fact that when our dad used to call her mum, she would know that it was dad on the phone because her mum's tone would change before she said it's your dad on the phone. It's all the subtleties that they're picking up on. So, and then it's the stability. Suddenly I've got two homes, and then there's the opportunity to really do that playing one off against another, which is normal and part of learning and is what all children do. But if you've got two homes and two parents that aren't getting on, there's a lot more opportunity to do that. And if the parents aren't staying on the same page in terms of the way they're choosing to raise them, i.e. values, principles, behaviour, boundaries, then that's just going to be exasperated by the fact that the teenager is pushing that they can play one off against another, which again, it doesn't make them a bad person, that's what all children do, and teenagers especially. But it just gives them so much more opportunity to really kind of create cracks that then really struggle to be repaired, particularly if the parents aren't getting on and are struggling to co-parent.
That's really interesting. And I mean, I think parenting, as you say, parenting teenagers is hard, no matter what, let alone if you're going through divorce proceedings. I mean, I don't have a teenager yet, but I have a preteen. So I have an 11-year-old who's already starting with the kind of Kevin and Perry huffing and puffing and, I hate you and all the rest of it. So I can definitely see that it's on the horizon, and how difficult that must be if you're going through a separation. So, I mean, starting from, I suppose, when you initially tell them about the separation and then moving forward, how would you suggest people deal with those kind of difficult conversations if we're trying to create boundaries and make sure that they're not used as messengers? What's the best way to deal with those conversations?
So the best case scenario is that you agree to communicate it together. So you show a level of unity, even though you're no longer together romantically, that you are still together as parents. And that's the best case scenario for you as parents, as well as for your children at any age, in terms of, if your teenager hasn't come home and you don't know where they are, the other person who's going to be as concerned about it as you is your co-parent. So you really need to have that level of support with each other. So starting that from the very moment that you tell them that you're getting a divorce, and admitting that you might not have all the answers, you may not have it all figured out. Don't bluff your way through it. Be as honest as you can be, but also have some of those initial questions that they're going to ask kind of figured out to cover the basics around the logistics of it and what it means for them. Also remember that teenagers, children, are generally selfish. They don't want to know about the ins and outs of how you're feeling. They want to know what's going to happen to the pet hamster and where that's going to live, and what it means for them in terms of going to school or seeing their friends, or think about the questions they're going to ask and how it's going to affect them, and have some agreement around that. But don't bluff your way through if you don't have the answer to them. It's better to say, we haven't figured that part out yet, but we know it's important and we'll come back to you. Where possible as well, try and give them some say in terms of they are older, they are, trying to get some independence and have a level of responsibility. So within some sort of boundary, let them have a kind of, this is my opinion on it, or this is what I would like to happen in terms of some of the practicalities of the living arrangements or something. Give them something that they can feel empowered and it's not just happening to them. But then don't overshare. Just give them what they need and don't tell them anymore. Also, if you have two teams of different ages, don't fall into the trap of telling the 17-year-old more than the 13-year-old because you think they're old enough and that they can handle it because they look like an adult. Because again, you then create this unfair dynamic within the siblings. They need to be able to come together and support each other going through this, and knowing that your brother or sister knows more than you because you're deemed too young or too small, or mum or dad has confided in this person over you, it can be really damaging and create some quite long-term resentment within the siblings who, they need to try and support each other as well as within your family dynamic. So be really consistent around handling communications with teenagers as well, and tell them what they need to know, give them as much input as you can, and be willing to say we don't have it all figured out, but what is important is we are doing this together. We've come to this decision together, and we both love you and we both want to support you. All the things you tell a younger child, the teen needs to hear it too.
I guess there's quite a lot about listening to your team, isn't there? And that's a consistent theme in a lot of the chats that we have, that so much of the communication is about listening, and it should be two-way. I guess the difficulty in this case is how much to listen and how much to respond, because you want to keep those boundaries that you said. So the difficulty with listening to teenagers is obviously teenagers often don't want to talk and want to sit quietly in their room and go and speak with their mates. How can people provide a safe space for their teenagers to be able to open up to them? Perhaps if they've not previously had that sort of relationship, that must be tricky.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, teens often, the last people they want to talk to is their parents. And that's the other thing. It can be easy to take things quite personally when you're separated and blame it on the divorce. But actually, chances are your team wouldn't want to talk to you about stuff anyway, even if you were still married. It's not a reflection of the divorce. Looking at opportunities, like making sure they are aware that you're available but not encroaching, potentially through sort of activities that they enjoy, going and doing those activities with them, giving them the opportunity if they want to speak, or knowing that you're there if they want to speak, but not pushing it. You can't keep standing in the threshold of their bedroom saying, come on, tell me how you're feeling. That's just going to push them further away. So create opportunities where they can speak. Always make sure that they're aware that you are open to it. And that goes in your actions as well. There's no point to saying, I'm here and you can talk to me, and then acting and doing the complete opposite or being short with them. They're going to go through a grief cycle. Everybody goes through a grief cycle with divorce. So you need to allow time for that, and everybody moves through that cycle at different stages, and your children will, and you will, and your ex will. So allow for that. And then also make sure that they have other people in their lives that they can go to and talk to as well. So role models are really, really key, and particularly when you get to teens, in terms of looking for role models outside of the core family. So whether that's extended family, or whether that's friends of the family, people that you know and trust, who are aware of the situation, who can guide your team and be there to answer questions that maybe they don't feel comfortable saying to mum and dad, or that they can express how they're feeling to, or express through different activities that they're doing, that they have that level of support. It doesn't always have to come from you two who are going through a divorce as well. Sometimes you're not emotionally equipped to answer all of their questions as they need it. So making sure that they have a really strong support is really key as well.
And what about, in terms of support, what about professional help? Is that something that can ever be useful? I mean, as family lawyers, something we talk about and we advise clients on is child inclusive mediation. So that's something where an older child, and often the teen, would be able to have a little bit of a say. What do you think about that? Is that something that can be effective, or is that going to be? I always have a slight concern, and maybe I'm just being a bit cautious. Is that exposing the child too much, because we try and keep the children out of the negotiations? What's your thoughts about that?
I mean, it really varies from family to family and case to case, but certainly getting them exposure to someone who is objective, who can give that really rational, third party almost perspective, and can deliver those messages that are really helpful but don't come with attachments. So they may hear something from an external professional that mum or dad would say, but they're not going to listen to it because it's come from mum and dad. So yes, I would say getting the right professionals to having the right support for teens, for children, but also for for the family as a whole, in terms of this is a really emotional, can be quite traumatic thing for your family to go through. And in order for you to come out the other side, there is support available to help you through that emotionally. And getting that support is really key, and that includes your children. In terms of them being involved in the mediation, again, it depends on the type of divorce and the family dynamic that there is. I think where they can feel empowered to have some say and feel that they're being listened to, and feel that, said you've got this ongoing fight for independence anyway, and this level of responsibility, there's agreeing kind of the practicalities and having some say in that and what it means for them and their life. And then there's getting into the ins and outs and the murkiness and the emotional stuff, and that's what they need to be protected from, and you need to have boundaries for. The other thing around boundaries as well is also not doing the opposite of having no boundaries, because you know that they're emotionally charged, and your divorce is having an impact on them, so therefore you don't tell them off for stuff that actually they need to be told off for, and they are going to push boundaries, and they need to know that there is still a level of stability and strength and parenting responsibility that's coming from the parents as well. So it's a really fine balance, because you don't want to make them feel that you're coming down too hard and you're not accessible to them, but equally it can't be the Wild West either. And they can just do what they like because you're conscious of the fact that they're emotional at the moment. You need to find the right balance for it, and have some stability and some consistency between the two of you in terms of parenting. Because the other thing that you see during divorce, which then goes into the family dynamic going forward, is weekend dads of, you can do what you like because this is my house and the rules don't apply as what they do at mum's. And that's not to say that it's always dads and not mums. It works both ways. But the person who's making them do the homework and is there with them during the week versus the one who's having fun with them at the weekends, you need to have some really grown-up conversations with parents around maintaining the values and the boundaries and the stability that all of your children need, and especially teens, because they will push those boundaries.
And what if you just can't do that with your ex? Either you're just in such a place that the two of you can't talk, or if there's been an abusive relationship, or there's narcissism involved, and just the co-parenting thing isn't working. What can you do to kind of counter those problems when you feel like your spouse just isn't acting in the right way?
Yeah, and that's when you really need to get some help. If you can't kind of broker this type of co-parenting between the two of you, then getting help, professional help, is really key. And there are occasions where co-parenting isn't an option and parallel parenting is the only option, in which case you need to provide as much consistency as you can at home, even if you know that the other parent isn't going to. Co-parenting plans are really helpful, but also, getting that third party person who can come in and ideally work with both sides in terms of brokering that. It's almost like the mediation for the parenting part of the divorce and the ongoing relationship. But also, even if you are dealing with a narcissistic ex who won't come to the table, who's not interested, you having the support to be able to negotiate and handle this relationship, and being able to pass on that level of knowledge and strategies to your children, because they're still dealing with a narcissistic parent and they will continue to do so. So enabling you and your children to be able to handle that relationship is still really key. So it's still worth getting the help, even if it feels like it's, you're not going to get it from the other side and they're not going to come to the table and be willing to join in the process. It's still really good to arm yourself and your children in how you then handle that particularly difficult family member, because they're not going away. That's the thing. You can divorce your ex, but if you have children together, they're in your life for life. And, I hear it all the time. Saying to the kids to leave home, it's until they finish school. No, it's not. If you want to be able to enjoy their graduation, their wedding day, grandchildren, joint Christmases, and be in that environment without feeling the emotional turmoil of your divorce all those years later because your ex is in the room, or their new partner, or whatever it is, then you need to deal with this stuff now and put the right dynamic in place.
It's really interesting talking about how everybody could be dealing with it slightly differently. And I just wanted to take you back, because you spoke about the grief cycle earlier and how the children, and the parents, they could all be in different stages of the grief cycle. And just for those people that don't know what that is, can you just run through that with us?
Yeah, so there's 5 stages to the grief cycle. So it's the same as if you lose someone you love. Divorce is the same thing. You're kind of grieving the relationship, and you will do that. Both of you will do that. Even if one person has initiated it, they will be further along the grief cycle than the other person, because sadly the difficulty with divorce is that usually one person has instigated it, or one person is further along emotionally in accepting it than the other person. You're never going through it at the same stage. And then your children have to go through that as well. And, it's well documented. You can look it up in terms of what those stages are, but there is a stage for, denial, there is a stage for anger, there is a stage for, trying to hold on and negotiate and holding on to this idea that it's going to be okay. And eventually, and there is a stage for depression. And then you get to the point of acceptance. And people move through this at different paces. It's not a one size fits all. It's not right, well, you'll have so many weeks in, denial and then you'll move to anger. And it's when you stay in a particular stage for a long time and struggle to get out of it that you really need to get some help. But ultimately, everybody will go through all 5 stages. You don't really skip a stage. Some are shorter than the other, but everybody kind of moves through this till they get to the point of acceptance. And this can be weeks, months, or years. And particularly if people don't get help, they can stay in anger and resentment, or they can stay in denial, or they can stay in depression. And, it really does change the dynamic of a family if someone can't move forward and move on, which is where you all want to get to, ultimately.
And are there any particular tips with teenagers that are perhaps in the anger stage or in the denial stage or in the depression stage to help them through that grief cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. It is about being open to talk through their emotions, to understand that you will move through this and it will pass, to offer them, some level of stability and security and an option for what the future will look like and edging towards that. And, there's lots of different strategies and lots of different ways of doing that, but also being really accepting of the fact that they're allowed to feel the way they're feeling. They are grieving the loss of their family setup as it once was. And everybody will be different, and teenagers will all be different, and how long they stay at each stage will vary. And that's where getting professional help or external help can really help them through that stage, because they may not want to see what's coming on the other side. They may not want to move out of that stage, and they have to go at their own pace and be given strategies to work through that work for that individual. It'd be too much to kind of cover in this podcast, but there are definitely strategies for each stage that perhaps can't be delivered by the parents, that need to have that external help, because it's too much, it's too charged when it comes from mum and dad. I'm not going to listen to you because you put me in this situation. Sometimes it needs to come from that role model, that's from the extended friends and family network, or from another professional, and they'll hear it very differently.
One of the big concerns that I hear from clients, or something that happens, is when teenagers take the separation badly, understandably, aren't talking, and then bad behaviour starts and they start to act out. And whereas with the younger child, there might be tantrums and so on. Obviously, when you're teenagers and they are sort of finding out who they are and experimenting the world, the risks are a bit higher, aren't they? There's risky behaviours, whether it's, substance abuse, potentially drug taking, alcohol, sex, whatever it may be, and getting themselves in situations that they might otherwise not. How do you deal with those sort of issues, which can obviously have really serious consequences?
Yeah, well, exactly. As you say, the stakes are just higher with teens. It comes back to that ability to get help, to have external people who can support them and support you in managing this. I think we've kind of got into this culture now where we think we all have to do it on our own. We're kind of dispersed and we move around a lot more, and everything's online, and we don't have those kind of personal interactions. We don't have the benefit of perhaps grandparents and aunts and uncles around the corner up the road that our previous generations really benefited from. But those relationships are really key in terms of facilitating and bringing home some of that messaging that falls flat from mum and dad, especially with everything moving online. Suicide in teenagers is terrifying. The rates are going up, particularly in teenage girls, self-harming, etc., because they have so much exposure to communities that are online that mum and dad just don't know who they're talking to. So I think it's really important to focus on putting physical people into their life that will enable them to get the right messages, to have that level of support that is bigger than just the two parents who are going through this at the same time. It is relying on that support network. It is getting them the help. It is enabling them to have open conversations about their feelings and not bottling up. And it may just be that they don't want to talk about it with you. So giving them the options and making sure that they have people who are really trustworthy in terms of trying to navigate away from some of this risky behaviour and looking at the pressure that they're under. Because kids today are under so much pressure. Stress has gone up in all of us because we're constantly available and at the mercy of this phone that we hold in our hands all the time. We can never disconnect. And there's so much around social media addiction and all the rest of it. They never switch off. So you need to make sure that and that's maybe some of the boundaries around what they're being exposed to. Our brains are incredible, but we are taking in information all of the time. And so you need to be thinking about the environments that they're in, who they are around, and that includes online as well. And that's a lot harder to monitor and it's a lot harder to put boundaries in. But thinking about screen time, thinking about boundaries, thinking about consistency and stability, and who are they actually coming into contact with? If they're not talking to you, who are they talking to? Because they need to be talking to someone.
I think there'd be a worry from a lot of parents that if they're going through a separation and the kids are having a difficult time, then they want to keep the kids happy, and suddenly go in and say, I'm limiting your screen time. That's like, there's got to be a fear that's throwing a grenade into the situation, isn't it?
Yeah, but and it is, but the alternative is so much worse.
Yeah. No, it's about making those tough decisions, and I suppose there's a lot of role modelling that comes into it and showing that, I mean, I'm terrible for this. I'm always on my phone in front of my kids. I need to absolutely stop it, and I'm a bad role model on that. But I suppose there's a lot of positive role modelling that you can try and do around the separation.
But this is it. I mean, we are products of our environment, so how the role models we are exposed to as children really shape who we are subconsciously and the programming that we then take into adulthood. So, it's a terrifying thought. But depending on how you go through your marriage and your divorce will have a direct impact to how your children then see relationships and marriage and potentially even divorce for themselves as adults. As I mentioned at the start, I'm the product of a blended family and the child of divorce. I'm a divorcee. I've seen firsthand if you don't have good role models in terms of the relationship, and whether that goes for married couples as well. A miserable marriage is just as damaging as a bad divorce. You have to think about the behavior that you are showing your children and especially teenagers, because they will pick you up for every contradiction in what you're saying versus how you're behaving. And that's where a lot of this conflict and friction comes from, because as I said, they are starting to question, well, you say this and I thought you walked on water and now I see that you don't, because actually you're pretty flawed. And if you're not showing the behaviour that you're wanting them to show you, then you're on a hiding to nothing and they have every right to pull you up on it. They are your biggest critics, and it's an opportunity for parents to learn and to do better. And so if you don't want them on their phones all the time, you need to show them that you're not on your phone. If they come into the room and have something to say to you and you're on your phone, or they're talking to you and your watch pings and you check it, what are you telling them about the importance of what they're saying, or whether you're of the importance of active listening or understanding or human connection or communication? And the chances are, if you're getting divorced, communication with your spouse hasn't been your strong point up until that point anyway. So if you then go into your divorce doing the same, then you're not really showing the behaviour that you want your team to show you, and you're kind of hiding to nothing.
If you get through the process, and well, not if, when you get through the process and you've gone through the separation and things are starting to recover, how do you rebuild that connection that maybe has been weakened a little bit with your teens? Is that something that happens? I think there's a fear that, I'm not getting on with them at the moment. Will they come back to me, after this divorce? Have you got any sort of tips or advice about how you can readjust to the sort of the new normal?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is really key in parenting as a whole is being able to hold your hands up and say when you haven't done things right, and being able to apologise. Gone are the days where it's a case of do as I say, not as I do, and you have to show me respect because I'm the adult. I think saying I didn't handle this particularly well, or I realise we're not as close as we perhaps were, or I feel that we're not as close as we were because of X, Y, and Z, I think is the first step to taking responsibility for what's gone on, for your behaviour, but also for the situation that's occurred. Because ultimately, the team didn't ask you to get divorced, so they're going to hold you responsible to a point. And showing that you can communicate and articulate your feelings again is showing them the way. And it doesn't mean that you'll then have to have an expectation on them to then open up to you. But again, you're illustrating the behaviour that you would like to see in them. You're saying, this is a safe space. I feel I can share with you that I've made mistakes, or that I can appreciate from your perspective that you may have felt like this, and I'm sorry if that's the case, and I want to rebuild. Communication is key, and you need to show that you can communicate and give them the opportunity to do the same. And then look to reconnect in terms of who they are. They're constantly changing, so their interests are constantly changing. Show an interest in what they're into now. Show an interest in the activities. Go along and do something, or go and take a weekend away where you really invest time in your team, particularly if you've got more than one child. One-on-one time with each child is a necessity for all children and all parents, regardless of whether you're divorcing or not, teenagers or not. So take the opportunity to go and do something one-on-one with them that they will enjoy, and look for opportunities to reconnect and show them the behaviour that they need to mimic, in terms of be the inspiration for that, and consistently do it as well, because you can't go, well, I'm now wanting to reconnect with you, so I'm going to show you this behaviour, but then you're not responding in the way that I want you to, so I'm just not going to bother. It's consistency is key. And you may have some, groundwork to make up if your eyes can take off. Well, quite rightly, because you're going through an emotional time yourself. This isn't just dealing with a teen, is it? This is dealing with everything else that you've got to deal with. And chances are you are going to drop balls at times. You're human. And, showing yourself some compassion and going, okay, I'm not always going to get this right, and saying that to your team as well. I'm a human being. I've dropped a few balls along the way, because we don't always get things right. But the important thing is to take responsibility for your actions and make a change. And that's what I'm doing now.
Really, really helpful. I wonder whether perhaps you could just close this episode with your 3 top tips for anybody that's going through a divorce and parenting teenagers.
Absolutely. So 3 top tips I would say is, firstly, don't overexpose them. They are still children, and know that they look like adults, but honestly, they don't need to know the ins and outs. Don't badmouth your ex in front of your teen or any children. They can't differentiate between themselves and the parents. So as much as they've grown up hearing, oh, you've got mum's eyes and you've got, dad's smile, the moment you say something negative about your ex, your child takes it really personally, as though it's an insult to them. And so you're not going to help your relationship with them going forward. And lastly, make sure that they have role models in their lives, practical, real people that you know who they are, because so much is online and it's a really scary world out there. And if they're not talking to you, they need to be talking to someone. So making sure that there are people in your team's life who that they can have an honest conversation with, or they can be receiving really helpful, good messaging around the situation, and that they will take it on board, because they may not listen to mum and dad at this time, but they do need to have good support. You need a good support network, and so do your children.
Oh, thank you so much, Nichole. I think there was loads of great advice and tips there for people that are in this really difficult time, and also in the difficult parenting time of parenting teenagers as well. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. You can find out more about the work Nichole does supporting separated parents at www.nicholefarrow.com. Nichole also recently launched a new app called Kin, a revolutionary platform to support co-parents and families facing the challenges of modern life. Further details are available on her website. If you'd like more information about our podcasts, head over to stowetalks.co.uk, and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.